In the unforgiving ballrooms of 1814 London, invisibility was a fate worse than scandal. For 3 seasons, Eleanor Grimston hadn't just been ignored. She had been erased, dubbed the ghost of Grosvenor Square, by the cruel tongues of the ton. She was the furniture, the wallpaper, the unremarkable spinster destined to fade away. That was, until the night Sebastian Vane, the ruthlessly sought-after Duke of Moreland, walked past a dozen diamond-clad heiresses, stopped directly in front of her plain muslin dress, and silenced the entire room with 5 impossible words. "Lady Eleanor, may I have this dance?" It wasn't a fairy tale beginning. It was the start of a dangerous lie. If one wished to find Eleanor Grimston at a ball, one had only to look towards the potted palms or the shadowed alcoves near the servants' entrance. It was there, on the fringes of the glittering world, that she had made her home for 3 excruciating seasons. At 23, Nell, as only her few kind acquaintances called her, was not ugly. That might have at least been interesting. She was, according to the whisperers of high society, aggressively ordinary. Her hair was neither chestnut nor gold, but a shade of unremarkable brown that refused to hold a curl. Her eyes were not sapphire or emerald, but a quiet, steady hazel. In a world that demanded peacocks, she was a sparrow. "Don't slouch, Eleanor. It makes you look even more like a governess," her mother, Lady Grimston, hissed, pinching the flesh of Nell's upper arm as they stood on the perimeter of Lady Jersey's crowded ballroom. "I am likely to be a governess, Mama," Nell replied quietly, adjusting her spectacles, another mark against her. "We both know Papa's debts at White's are not getting any smaller." "Hush! Do not speak of it here," Lady Grimston snapped, her fan fluttering violently. "Tonight is crucial. Lord Hamilton needs a mother for his 4 unruly children. He is 50, fat, and smells of boiled cabbage, but he is solvent. Smile." Nell managed a tight grimace. She watched the dazzling creatures of the ton swirl in the centre of the room. There was Lady Cressida Croft, a vision in sapphire silk, currently holding court with 3 besotted earls. Cressida had once spilled red punch on Nell's only good white dress and claimed Nell had tripped her. No one had believed the sparrow over the peacock. "Did you hear?" A voice drifted from nearby. It was Cressida, her voice designed to carry. "Moreland is here tonight. They say he's finally looking to purchase a brood mare." Her sycophants tittered. "He's terrifying," one said. "Rich as Croesus, but cold as a crypt. They say he didn't even weep when his father and brother died in that carriage accident." Sebastian Vane, the 8th Duke of Moreland. He was the dark legend of the season. He rarely attended these frivolous events, preferring his estates in Northumberland or the shadowed corners of Parliament. He was renowned for his cynical assessment of humanity, his immense political power, and a jawline so sharp it could supposedly cut glass. Nell had never seen him close up. Men like Moreland didn't look at women like her. They looked through them to see if the brandy tray was approaching. "Oh, look," Cressida sneered, her eyes landing on Nell across the room. "The ghost is haunting the hydrangeas again. Perhaps if she stands very still, Moreland will mistake her for a statue and buy her for his garden." The cruel laughter stung, familiar yet fresh every time. Nell lifted her chin, refusing to let them see the moisture gathering behind her spectacles. She turned away, feigning deep interest in a lackluster floral arrangement. She was so focused on maintaining her dignity that she didn't notice the hush that fell over the room, rippling outward from the grand entrance like a tide going out. The music didn't stop, but the chatter died. A man was walking through the crowd. He moved with the predatory grace of a panther in a paddock of sheep. He was taller than the other men, broad-shouldered in stark black evening wear that made the colourful silks of the fops around him look ridiculous. His face was austere, strikingly handsome but devoid of warmth, his dark eyes scanning the room with bored contempt. The Duke of Moreland, every eligible debutante puffed out her chest. Mothers shoved their daughters forward. Lady Cressida practically threw herself into his path, dropping her fan with a calculated gasp. He stepped over the fan without breaking stride. Nell watched, fascinated by his blatant disregard for the rules they all lived by. He was heading straight for the terrace doors, clearly intending to escape. Then he stopped it. His head turned, and his gaze, intense, intelligent, and startlingly cold, collided with hers across 30 feet of polished floor. Nell froze. She instinctively looked behind her to see who he was actually looking at. There was only a wall. When she turned back, he was moving again. Toward her. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced her chest. He is going to ask me to move so he can reach the terrace, she thought wildly. Or perhaps I am standing on his footman. He stopped directly in front of her. Up close, he was overwhelming. The scent of sandalwood, cold rain, and expensive tobacco enveloped her. He was terrifyingly large, and his eyes were not just dark. They were a storm cloud grey, currently fixed on her face with unnerving intensity. Lady Eleanor Grimston, I presume? His voice was a deep baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Yes, Your Grace, she managed, her voice a pathetic squeak. He didn't smile. He looked her up and down, not with lust, but with the clinical assessment of a general inspecting a newly forged cannon. He took in the plain muslin dress, the lack of jewels, the spectacles. Good, he said, inexplicably. He extended a gloved hand. You will dance with me. A waltz. It wasn't a question. From the corner of her eye, Nell saw her mother, clutching her chest as if having an apoplexy. Lady Cressida looked ready to murder someone with her bare hands. Your Grace, Nell whispered, terrified. I do not think that is wise. I am not who you think I am. I am nobody. Something flickered in his cold eyes. Amusement? On the contrary, Lady Eleanor, you are exactly who I require. Now dance, unless you wish to cause a scene. Trembling, she placed her hand in his. It was warm, solid, and terrifyingly real. As he led her to the center of the floor, the ghost of Grosvenor Square suddenly became the most visible woman in London. Sebastian Vane hated London. He hated the preening, the scheming, the insipid conversations about weather while the country faced genuine crises of poverty and political unrest. Most of all, he hated that he needed a wife. The ultimatum from his late father's will had been clear. Marry before his 30th birthday, or the unentailed portion of the estate, including the funds he secretly used to finance his investigations into corruption in the War Office, would be frozen by the trustees until he was 40. He turned 30 in 2 months. He didn't need a love match. He needed a partner. Or more accurately, he needed a distraction that wouldn't distract him. He had watched Eleanor Grimston for 20 minutes before approaching her. He'd seen the way the Croft girl insulted her. He'd seen Nell's spine stiffen, the intelligence in her eyes, as she chose silence over a futile defense. She was observant. She was used to being invisible, which meant she saw things others missed. And most importantly, she was desperate. He knew about her father's debts. His solicitors had been thorough. As they waltzed, she was stiff in his arms, holding herself as far away as propriety allowed. She danced perfectly, if mechanically. Breathe, Lady Eleanor, he murmured, steering her expertly past a venomous-looking Lady Jersey. I haven't bitten anyone in at least 3 days. She looked up at him, her hazel eyes magnified slightly by her spectacles. There was fear there, yes, but also a spark of defiance he hadn't expected. Why are you doing this? she asked, her voice low and steady now. "You have made me the target of every spiteful woman in this room. Is this some cruel wager with your friends at White's? Because if it is unworthy of your rank." Sebastian was genuinely surprised. Most women would be swooning or mentally measuring drapes for his ducal seat. She was accusing him of bullying. "I never wager," he said coldly. "It is a fool's pastime. I am dancing with you because I am assessing you." "Assessing me? For what? A position as a governess to your wards? I wasn't aware you had any." He spun her, perhaps a little faster than necessary. "For the position of Duchess of Moreland." She stumbled, just slightly, losing her impeccable rhythm for a fraction of a second. She stared at his cravat, her face draining of what little colour it had. "That is not funny, Your Grace. I rarely make jokes. They are inefficient." He pulled her slightly closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I require a wife. I require her immediately. I do not wish to be courted, fawned over, or lied to by women who only see my title. I need a woman who is practical, intelligent, and understands the harsh realities of the world. You, Lady Eleanor, have been enduring harsh realities in this ballroom for 3 years without crumbling. You are resilient. You want to marry me because I am plain and pitiable." "I want to marry you because you are invisible," he corrected brutally, "and because you need me as much as I need you. Your father, Sir Thomas, owes £4,000 to moneylenders who are far less gentlemanly than I am. I can make that disappear tomorrow." The music ended. Nell stood frozen in the centre of the ballroom, her hand still gripping his sleeve. The blunt force of his proposition left her breathless. It was an insult and a lifeline all at once. "Think on it," Sebastian said, releasing her and bowing formally. "I will call on you tomorrow at 11. Do not wear that dreadful shade of beige. It does you no favours." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the middle of the floor, the subject of 1,000 whispers. The proposal, when it officially came the next morning in her father's shabby drawing room, was less a romantic moment and more a hostile corporate takeover. Sir Thomas Grimston was practically salivating, his hands shaking as he offered the Duke inferior sherry. Sebastian declined it with a mere lift of his hand. "I have outlined the terms," Sebastian said, sliding a heavy parchment across the scarred oak table toward Nell. He ignored her father entirely. Nell read it. It was generous beyond belief. Her father's debts cleared, a staggering pin money allowance for her, and complete autonomy over the Moreland domestic household. In return, she was to provide him with an heir when requested, and she was never to interfere in his private business. "What is this private business?" Nell asked, looking up from the document. She wore a simple blue morning dress. Not beige, she'd made sure of that. "Matters of state, and matters that do not concern you," Sebastian said, his face an unreadable mask. "Do we have an agreement?" Nell looked at her father, who was nodding frantically, his eyes begging her not to ruin this. She thought of the sneers at Almack's. She thought of the lonely future as a governess, always on the outside looking in. She looked at Sebastian Vane. He was a mountain of ice, but he was offering her safety, perhaps respect. "I have conditions of my own," she said softly. Her father gasped. "Nell, do not—" "Quiet, Sir Thomas," Sebastian snapped, his eyes never leaving Nell's. "Go on, Lady Eleanor." "I will not be ignored," she said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "If I am to be your Duchess, I will not be another piece of furniture in your grand houses. I want to be useful. I want to be seen. By you." For a moment, silence stretched taut in the small room. Sebastian studied her, really studied her, seeing the steel beneath the sparrow's feathers. "Very well," he said slowly. "You will not be ignored. I promise you that. But you may come to regret asking for my attention." She signed. The ink was barely dry before he announced that the wedding would take place in 3 days by special license. The wedding was a blur of stunned faces. The ton was apoplectic. The bronze beauties, led by Lady Cressida, wore black as if attending a funeral. When Nell stood at the altar of St. George's, Hanover Square, looking up at this towering stranger who was now her husband, she felt a terrifying thrill. She was no longer Eleanor Grimston, the wallflower. She was the Duchess of Moreland. But as the carriage rattled away from the church, heading toward his massive, intimidating London townhouse, Moreland House, Sebastian didn't take her hand. He immediately pulled a sheaf of papers from his coat and began to read, the cold mask slamming back into place. "Your Grace?" she ventured after 10 minutes of silence. "Sebastian," he said curtly, not looking up. "And we have appearances to maintain in public, Eleanor. In private, I have work to do. My housekeeper, Mrs. Croft, will show you to your wing. It is separate from mine, naturally." Nell felt the cold seep into her bones. She had traded being invisible to the world for being invisible to the one man who had promised to see her. Moreland House was a gilded cage, vast, beautiful, and utterly lonely. 3 weeks into her marriage, Nell had seen Sebastian only at dinner, where their conversations were polite, stilted affairs performed for the benefit of the servants. She learned he was a man of rigid routines. He spent hours in his study, received strange visitors late at night, rough-looking men who didn't belong in Mayfair, and often left the house well past midnight, returning before dawn smelling of the dirty Thames River smoke. Rumours began to swirl. They said the marriage was a sham. They said he kept a mistress in Covent Garden. Nell determined she would not be the pathetic wife. If he wouldn't talk to her, she would learn about him other ways. She began to use her old skills, the skills of the wallflower. She learned which floorboards outside his study didn't creak. She learned that the ventilation grate in her morning room connected directly to the chimney of his private library below. One rainy Tuesday, sitting quietly with her embroidery, she heard voices drifting up through that grate. "The shipment is delayed, Your Grace. Lord Avery is getting suspicious. If he finds out about the French connection..." "Avery is a fool." Sebastian's voice was hard, sharper than she'd ever heard it. "But a dangerous one. We need proof he's the one selling the troop movement plans to Napoleon's remaining sympathizers. If that manifest doesn't arrive by Friday, 300 British soldiers in Calais are going to walk into a slaughter." Nell dropped her needle. He wasn't having an affair. He was hunting traitors. Suddenly the pieces fit. The late-night meetings, the cynical facade, the need for a wife who was invisible. He needed a cover. A boring domestic life to deflect attention from his espionage. A thrill shot through her, fear mixed with adrenaline. That evening, they were to attend the Cavendish ball. It was their first major public appearance since the wedding. As she dressed, Nell made a decision. She would not be the beige sparrow tonight. She chose a dress of deep emerald silk that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. It was cut lower than she usually dared. She left her spectacles on her dressing table. She could see well enough without them to dance, and she wanted nothing to hide behind. When she descended the grand staircase, Sebastian was waiting in the hall. He looked up from his pocket watch, impatience written on his face. The watch snapped closed. He stared. His eyes traveled from her exposed collarbone to the hem of the emerald gown, then back to her face. "You aren't wearing your spectacles," he said, his voice sounding slightly strangled. "I find I am seeing things much more clearly these days, Sebastian," she replied, holding his gaze. At the ball, she was a revelation. No longer hunched and hiding, she stood tall on the arm of the most powerful duke in England. People stared, but this time, the whispers were different. They were wondering how they had missed her. Halfway through the evening, while Sebastian was trapped in a political discussion, Lord Avery approached her. He was an oily man with too many rings on his fingers. "Duchess," Avery leered, bowing too low, "marriage seems to agree with you. You have blossomed. Tell me, does Moreland appreciate his new flower, or is he still too busy with his late-night hobbies?" It was a probe. He was fishing for information. Nell smiled, a sweet, vacuous smile she didn't know she possessed. "Oh, Lord Avery, Sebastian is terribly dull, I'm afraid. He spends all his nights poring over estate ledgers. He worries so much about the price of wool in Northumberland, I can barely keep him awake past 10. Avery's eyes gleamed with relief. "Is that so? Just wool? Endless sheep," she sighed dramatically. "It is quite tedious." She saw Avery relax completely. He believed her. He believed she was just a silly, neglected wife. When they returned home that night, Sebastian followed her into her private sitting room, something he had never done. "What did you say to Avery?" he demanded, closing the door. "I saw him laughing with you. He is a dangerous man, Eleanor. You must stay away from him." Nell turned to him, her heart hammering, but her voice steady. "I told him you were boring. I told him you only cared about sheep. He believes I am a foolish, neglected wife who knows nothing of his French connections or the troop manifests for Calais." Sebastian went completely still. The air left the room. "How?" "I told you I wouldn't be ignored, Sebastian. I listen. I see things. You needed a wife who was invisible, but you forgot that invisibility is a superpower. I just bought you time. Avery thinks you're distracted by domesticity." Sebastian looked at her, really looked at her, for the second time since they'd met. The ice in his eyes melted, replaced by a blazing intensity that made her knees weak. "You foolish, brilliant woman," he breathed. "You could have gotten yourself killed." "I am your partner," she said stubbornly. "Use me." The dynamic shifted instantly. Sebastian didn't suddenly become warm and affectionate, but the doors to his study were no longer locked to her. He brought her in. He showed her the decrypted letters, the maps of French coastlines, the lists of suspected double agents in Parliament. He discovered that Nell had a frighteningly analytical mind. She could spot patterns in supply ledgers that his seasoned clerks missed. "It's the tea shipments," she pointed out one late night, 3 weeks later, leaning over his massive mahogany desk. Her hair was loose, falling over the maps. "Look, every time Avery receives a shipment of rare Fujian tea, a British frigate is ambushed 2 days later. It's a code." Sebastian was so close, she could feel the heat radiating from him. He looked at the ledger, then back at her. His hand instinctively covered hers on the desk. "My God," he whispered. "It was right in front of me." He looked up, and they were suddenly inches apart. The air crackled with something that had nothing to do with espionage. His gaze dropped to her lips. Nell's breath hitched. She wanted him to kiss her. She wanted it more than she had ever wanted anything. He pulled back sharply, clearing his throat, the wall slamming back up. "Excellent work, Eleanor. I must go to the War Office immediately. This changes everything." He left her alone in the study, trembling with unspent tension. He still didn't see her as a woman, she thought bitterly, only as a useful asset. But Sebastian was seeing her. That was the problem. He was seeing her too much. He was finding himself distracted by the curve of her neck when she bent over a map, by the fierce intelligence in her hazel eyes. He couldn't afford to care for her. Caring made you vulnerable. His father had cared too much, and it had killed him. The crisis came 2 days later. Sebastian needed to intercept the final message from Avery's contact at a seedy tavern in the docks. It was a two-man job, but his usual partner had been waylaid with a knife to the gut in a back alley, a warning from Avery. "I'm going with you," Nell announced, finding him loading pistols in the library. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous." "You have no one else, and I am the only one who knows the codes as well as you do. I can dress as a lad. I'm plain enough to pull it off, aren't I?" She threw his own cruel words back at him, but with a wry smile. He cursed, argued, but eventually relented. That night, dressed in rough breeches and a woolen cap that hid her hair, Nell stood back to back with the Duke of Moreland in a stinking taproom in Wapping. They didn't look like a duke and duchess. They looked like two desperate souls in the London underbelly. When the brawl started, because of course it did, Sebastian shoved her behind the bar. He fought with a brutal efficiency that terrified and thrilled her. But one of Avery's thugs raised a cudgel behind him. "Sebastian, behind you!" she screamed, throwing a heavy pewter tankard with surprising accuracy. It struck the thug square in the forehead. Sebastian spun, finished the man off, and grabbed her hand. "Run!" They practically fell into their waiting, unmarked carriage, breathless, dirty, and alive. They had the papers. Adrenaline was coursing through them. Sebastian looked at her, her face smudged with soot, her cap askew, her eyes shining with triumph. "You are," he rasped, "the most magnificent creature I have ever known." He didn't pull away this time. He kissed her. It was a desperate, hungry kiss, born of danger and shared secrets. Nell melted into him, kissing him back with all the repressed longing of her lonely life. For one glorious week, they were truly married. The ice had thawed. They worked together by day and shared a bed by night, discovering a passion that stunned them both. Then, the betrayal came. It arrived in the form of a letter, delivered not to Sebastian, but to Nell, while she was taking tea with the venomous Lady Cressida, part of her role to maintain their cover. "Oh, my dear," Cressida cooed, sliding a folded paper across the table at Tate's tea room. "I shouldn't be the one to tell you, but the whole town is talking. They say Moreland's investigations are just a cover for something else entirely." Nell opened the letter. It was a note in Sebastian's distinctive handwriting, addressed to a Madame de Graff, a known French opera singer and suspected spy. It spoke of payments, of meeting in secret, of fooling the sparrow at home. The world tilted. Fooling the sparrow. It was his private name for her. Nell went home, her heart turning to ash. Sebastian was out. She went to his study and found the hidden drawer she hadn't known about before. Cressida's note had hinted at its location. Inside were transfers of massive sums of money to French accounts, and a signed confession, seemingly in Sebastian's hand, admitting to selling secrets to cover his father's old gambling debts. It didn't make sense. It contradicted everything they had worked for. But the evidence was overwhelming. Had she just been the ultimate patsy? Had he used her brilliance to help him eliminate his rival spies so he could have the treasonous market to himself? When Sebastian returned that evening, he found her packed. "Eleanor, what is this?" He reached for her, but she flinched away. She threw the letters at him. "Tell me these are forgeries. Tell me you didn't use me to betray England. Tell me I wasn't just the sparrow you fooled to cover your tracks." Sebastian went pale as he read them. "Nell, listen to me. This is Avery's doing. He's planting evidence. Madame de Graff is a double agent. She works for me." And the money? The confession? Forgeries. Good ones, but forgeries. You must trust me. Trust you. You, who lied to the world for years. You, who married me as a business transaction. The hurt was too deep, blinding her logic. I stood by you when you were cold. I cannot stand by you if you are a traitor. If you leave now, Sebastian said, his voice cracking, you destroy our cover. Avery wins. He will know he broke us. He already has, she whispered. She left that night, returning to her parents' shabby home. The scandal was immediate and cataclysmic. The plain Duchess had left the perfect Duke. Society feasted on the carcass of their marriage. The silence of her childhood bedroom was not peaceful. It was suffocating. For 2 weeks, Eleanor Grimston, no, she was still Eleanor Vane, though the title felt like a borrowed coat she had been forced to return, sat surrounded by the faded beige wallpaper that had once defined her entire existence. Her parents' home in Bloomsbury was exactly as she had left it, smelling faintly of boiled cabbage and damp wool, filled with the nervous energy of people perpetually on the brink of financial ruin. But Nell had changed. The beige walls no longer offered camouflage. They felt like prison bars. I told you it wouldn't last, Lady Grimston sniffed, sitting on the edge of Nell's narrow bed, her face pinched with a mixture of pity and "I told you so" triumph. Men like Moreland don't stay fascinated by plain wrens like us for long. You should have secured a separate settlement while you had the chance. Now we are ruined twice over. The scandal is worse than the debts. Nell didn't answer. She just stared out the rain-streaked window at the grey London street. She hadn't spoken much since returning. The physical ache of missing Sebastian was a constant, dull throb in her chest, sharper than any insult her mother could hurl. It wasn't just the loss of his presence. It was the loss of herself. For those few glorious weeks, she hadn't been a wren. She had been a hawk. She had decoded ciphers, dodged cudgels in Wapping, and felt the electric thrill of being vital to something important. Now, she was just Nell again. But the hawk wasn't dead. It was just wounded. As the days bled into one another, the initial blinding pain of Sebastian's apparent betrayal began to recede, leaving behind the cold, hard clarity that had always been her greatest asset. She began to think, not with her broken heart, but with the mind Sebastian had admired. She still had the letters. She had thrown them at him that awful night, but in the chaos of her departure, she had snatched them back from the floor. Why? Perhaps some deeply buried part of her hadn't wanted to leave the only tangible pieces of him she had left, even if they were evidence of his treachery. On the 15th day of her exile, a Tuesday soaked in miserable drizzle, Nell unlocked the small wooden writing desk where she'd hidden them. She spread the confession and the notes to Madame de Graaff out on her quilt. She forced herself to read them again, not as a jealous wife, but as the Duchess of Moreland, amateur spy. My dearest Marie, the sparrow remains oblivious. The funds will be transferred by Friday. The handwriting was perfect. The arrogant slant of the T's, the heavy pressure on the downstrokes. It was Sebastian's hand. Anyone would believe it. But Sebastian didn't write like a man composing a love letter. He wrote like a man running an empire. His real notes were terse, efficient. These letters were too flowery, too boastful. They read like what someone thought a treacherous duke would sound like. She picked up the confession. It was dated June 14th, 1814. Nell frowned. June 14th. The date itched at the back of her mind. She stood up and paced the small room. June 14th. Where had they been? That was 2 days before the Wapping incident. They had been at home, surely. No. She stopped. June 14th was the night of the thunderstorm. Sebastian had been in a foul mood because his usual ink supplier was closed, and he'd had to use inferior ink from his secretary's desk for urgent dispatches. He had complained for an hour that it smudged if you looked at it sideways. Nell rushed back to the bed. She held the confession up to the weak light from the window. The ink was indelible, dark and crisp. It hadn't smudged at all. Her heart began a slow, thunderous beat against her ribs. If he had written this on June 14th, it would have been with the bad ink. She grabbed the other letters. She looked closely at the red wax seals, the Moreland lion rampant. It looked identical to the seal ring he wore every day. Wait. She remembered a night in his study, early in their true partnership. He had been teaching her how to spot tampered seals. Look for the imperfections, Nell. True security lies in the flaws. My ring has a microscopic chip in the lion's left claw from when my father dropped it on a marble hearth. A perfect seal is a forgery. She fumbled for her spectacles. She hadn't worn them in weeks, but she needed them now. She peered at the wax. The lion's claw was razor-sharp. Perfect. A choked sob escaped her, half laugh, half wail. They were fakes. Brilliant fakes, but fakes nonetheless. And if they were fakes, Sebastian hadn't betrayed her. He hadn't betrayed England. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had left him alone. She had done exactly what Lord Avery had wanted. Avery hadn't just wanted to frame Sebastian. He had wanted to isolate him. He knew Nell had become Sebastian's second set of eyes, his partner. To take down the Duke, Avery first had to remove the Duchess. "You fool," she whispered to herself, tears streaming down her face. "You brilliant, stupid fool." She had to go back. She had to tell him. Nell was shoving her few belongings into a valise when the sound of a newsboy shouting on the street below froze her blood. "Moreland traitor. Duke to be arrested. High treason charges. Read all about it." The blood drained from her face. It was happening now. She didn't bother with a bonnet. She didn't bother telling her mother goodbye. Nell grabbed the bundle of forged letters, ran down the narrow stairs, and burst out onto the rainy London street. It was chaos. The news had set the city buzzing. Hacks were taken. Carriages were jammed. She didn't have money for a fare anyway. She ran. She ran through the mud of Bloomsbury, her sensible shoes splashing in puddles, her brown dress heavy with rainwater. She ran until her lungs burned and her side felt like it was splitting open. People stared. A gentlewoman running alone in the rain was a sight. But she didn't care. She was invisible to them, remember? Just a crazy brown sparrow darting through traffic. When she reached Grosvenor Square, a crowd had already gathered outside Moreland House. It wasn't a polite society crowd. It was a mob of curious onlookers, sensing blood in the water. Red-coated horse guards surrounded the perimeter. The massive front doors were open, and she could see figures in the grand entry hall. Nell pushed her way through the throng. "Let me through. Back away, miss," a burly corporal growled, barring her path with his musket. "Official business. No gawkers." "I'm not a gawker, you idiot. I'm the Duchess of Moreland. That is my husband you are arresting." The corporal blinked, looking her up and down. She was soaked, muddy, her hair plastered to her skull, wearing a dress 3 seasons out of fashion. She looked like a deranged housemaid, not a duchess. "Pull the other one, love. Off you go." Desperation clawed at her throat. She couldn't be stopped now, not when she was so close. Then she saw him. Standing just inside the doorway, looking pale and smug, was Lord Avery. He was watching the proceedings with the satisfaction of a cat that had finally cornered the canary. "Lord Avery!" she screamed, her voice cracking with raw fury. Avery looked up. His eyes widened slightly, as he recognized the bedraggled creature shouting his name. "Let her through!" Avery called out, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Let the loyal wife see her traitor husband one last time. It adds a touch of pathos to the day, don't you think?" The corporal grudgingly lowered his musket. Nell didn't wait for a second invitation. She dashed up the marble steps and into the cavernous entry hall. The scene inside was like a tableau vivant of a nightmare. Sebastian stood in the center of the black and white marble floor, flanked by 4 soldiers. He was impeccably dressed, his face a mask of icy indifference. But Nell knew him. She saw the tension in his jaw, the deadness in his eyes. He had given up. He thought he had lost everything that mattered, his honor and her. A portly man in a magistrate's wig was reading from a parchment scroll. Charges of high treason, conspiring with enemy agents, and the misappropriation of crown funds. "Sebastian!" The sound of her voice shattered his stony facade. His head snapped toward her, and the naked vulnerability in his eyes almost brought her to her knees. "Eleanor." He sounded wrecked. "What are you doing here? Get out. You don't want to be part of this." "I am already part of this," she said, her voice steadying as she stepped fully into the hall. She ignored the soldiers, ignored the magistrate. She only saw him. "I am your wife, and I am your partner." Lord Avery stepped forward, smoothing his silk waistcoat. "A touching reunion, really. But I'm afraid you're too late, my dear. The evidence is irrefutable. Your husband's own handwriting condemns him." Nell turned her gaze on Avery. It wasn't the shy, retiring gaze of the wallflower. It was a glare that could have melted steel. "The evidence," she said, holding up the soggy bundle of letters, "is a lie, and I can prove it." The magistrate looked over his spectacles. "My lady, these documents were found by you. You attested to their authenticity by your departure." "I was a fool," Nell said clearly, her voice ringing off the marble walls. "I was hurt, and I let my emotions cloud my judgment, exactly as Lord Avery intended." "Preposterous," Avery scoffed, though a flicker of unease crossed his oily face. "Magistrate, finish your duty. The woman is hysterical." "I am not hysterical," Nell said, stepping closer to the magistrate. "I am observant, something you all failed to be. Look at this confession." She thrust the June 14th letter at the magistrate. "Read the date." "June the 14th, the magistrate read, confused. On June 14th, the Duke's study was out of his preferred German ink. He was forced to use a cheap domestic blend that he complained about incessantly because it took 20 minutes to dry. Look at this document. There are no smudges. The ink is dark, rich, German. He couldn't have written it on that day." Sebastian's eyes lit up. He remembered. "She's right," Sebastian said, his deep voice commanding the room once more. "I threw a brimming inkwell into the fireplace that night in a fit of temper. You can check the hearth in my study. The stains are still there." Avery laughed nervously. "A minor detail. He could have misdated it. The other letters—" "The seals," Nell interrupted, moving to the next piece of evidence. "Magistrate, do you have a magnifying glass?" The magistrate, looking thoroughly bewildered by this turn of events, patted his pockets and produced a small reading glass. "Look at the wax seal on this letter to the French opera singer," Nell commanded. "It is a perfect impression of the Moreland crest. Flawless." "Indeed," the magistrate murmured, peering through the glass. "A very fine seal." "Too fine," Nell said triumphantly. She turned to Sebastian. "Your Grace, your ring, if you please." Sebastian didn't hesitate. He pulled the heavy gold signet ring from his finger and tossed it to her. She caught it mid-air. "Look at the lion's left claw," Nell said, handing the ring and the glass to the magistrate. The magistrate squinted. Why, there's a chip, a tiny piece missing from the claw. Exactly, Nell said, whirling on Avery. Every genuine document my husband signs has that imperfection. These incriminating letters do not. They were sealed with a counterfeit ring, a perfect counterfeit, likely made from a wax impression stolen by a treacherous servant. The silence in the hall was absolute. The soldiers shifted uneasily. Lord Avery's face had gone from smug to a sickly shade of grey. This proves nothing, Avery stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. She's his wife. She's lying to save him. I have one more thing, Nell said, and she played her final card, a bluff, but a calculated one. She looked straight at Avery. The Fujian tea shipments, my lord. Do you remember them? Avery flinched visibly. In these forged letters, Nell continued, her voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet level. The Duke, mentions receiving payments in Fujian tea. But Sebastian and I never used tea as a code for money. We used it as a code for something else entirely. Something only the real traitor would know, because he was the one receiving the actual shipments. It was a gamble. They had discovered Avery was using tea shipments as a cover, but she was twisting it, betting Avery would panic, thinking they knew more than they did. Panic he did. Avery's hand darted inside his coat. Enough of this! Arrest him! I have orders from the Prime Minister himself! No, Lord Avery. Sebastian's voice was like thunder as he stepped forward, breaking free of the soldiers who no longer seemed keen to hold him. You have orders you forged, just like you forged those letters. Sebastian reached into his own immaculate coat and withdrew a sealed packet, the genuine article, stained with Thames water from their night in Wapping. Magistrate, Sebastian said, if you want true evidence of treason, I suggest you open this. It contains the real troop manifests for Calais, intercepted on their way to Avery's French paymasters, in his own handwriting, sealed with his own ring. Avery snarled like a cornered animal. He pulled a small pistol from his coat, aiming it wildly. Back! All of you! I won't hang for this! Nell didn't think. She didn't breathe. She just acted. She was standing closest to him, while his attention was fixed on the much larger, more dangerous Duke. Nell swung her heavy, rain-soaked valise with both hands. It connected with the side of Avery's head with a satisfying thud. The pistol discharged harmlessly into the ornate plaster ceiling as Avery crumpled to the marble floor, dazed. Sebastian was on him in an instant, kicking the pistol away and pinning Avery with a knee to the chest. The soldiers, finally realizing who the real villain was, rushed forward to take custody of the sputtering, defeated lord. As they dragged Avery away, he screamed curses at them both, but mostly at Nell. You plain little nothing! You ruined everything! Nell stood panting, her chest heaving, her hands shaking. The adrenaline was leaving her body, replaced by a trembling exhaustion. The hall cleared slowly. The magistrate, bowing profusely and muttering apologies, beat a hasty retreat. The servants vanished into the shadows, sensing their masters needed privacy. Sebastian and Eleanor were left alone in the wreckage of the grand entry hall. He didn't move toward her at first. He just looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the mud, the soaked hair, the fierce, defiant set of her shoulders. You came back, he said, his voice rough with an emotion she had never heard before. I had to, she whispered. I realized I forgot to trust the one thing that actually mattered. Not the evidence, but you. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He didn't care about the mud on her dress or the servants who might be peeking. He grabbed her face in his hands, his touch desperately tender. "I should have told you," he said fiercely. "I should have told you Avery might try to target you. I thought I was protecting you by keeping you ignorant of that danger. I was an arrogant fool. I nearly lost you because I couldn't bear to make you a full target." "I told you," Nell said, covering his hands with hers. "I am not a piece of furniture to be protected. I am your wife." "You are much more than that, Eleanor Vane," he breathed, resting his forehead against hers. "You are my partner, my savior, and I am desperately, hopelessly in love with you." Nell gave a watery laugh. "Even when I look like a drowned rat?" Sebastian pulled back slightly, his grey eyes blazing with that intense, terrifying warmth she had only seen once before. "You," he said, "have never looked more beautiful than you do right now, holding a weaponized valise and covered in London muck." He kissed her then. It wasn't the desperate kiss of the docks, nor the tentative first kisses of their bedroom. It was a kiss of absolute certainty. A promise. The world might still call her plain, if they dared. But as Nell melted into the embrace of the most powerful duke in England, she knew the truth. She wasn't a sparrow, and she wasn't a ghost. She was Nell, and she had finally, truly, been seen. 6 months later, the grand ballroom of Moreland House was ablaze with light. It was the first ball of the new season, and every invitation had been fought for, with near-lethal desperation. Eleanor stood at the top of the gilded staircase, her hand resting lightly on Sebastian's arm. She wore gold tonight, a daring, shimmering silk that caught every candlelight. She still wore her spectacles, having decided she rather liked seeing the envious expressions of the ton in sharp detail. "Are you ready?" Sebastian murmured, his voice a low rumble that was for her ears alone. "They are just people, Sebastian," she replied, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "Terrified, gossiping people. After facing down Avery with a valise, I think I can handle Lady Jersey." Sebastian chuckled, a sound that still made heads turn, so rare was it in public. "Avery is currently enjoying the hospitality of the Tower, thanks to you. I suspect Lady Jersey is far less dangerous." They descended the stairs. The hush that fell over the room was different this time. It wasn't born of confusion or mockery. It was born of pure, unadulterated awe. The Duke and Duchess of Moreland were no longer just wealthy aristocrats. They were legends. The details of Avery's arrest had been hushed up, naturally. But rumours had a way of escaping. The ton knew that the plain Duchess had done something extraordinary, something that had saved her husband and cemented her position as the most formidable hostess in London. Lady Cressida Croft, standing near the perimeter in a dress that was slightly too brightly coloured for the current fashion, looked away as they passed. Nell didn't even feel a flicker of triumph. She just felt indifferent. Cressida was still playing a game Nell had long since outgrown. As they reached the ballroom floor, Sebastian turned to her. He didn't need to ask for a dance this time. The floor cleared automatically for them. They moved together with an easy, practiced grace. They were perfectly in sync, two halves of the same dangerous, brilliant whole. "I received a missive from the Foreign Office today," Sebastian said quietly as he spun her. "There is some concern about a Russian countess who has taken a sudden interest in our naval dockyards." Nell's eyes sparkled behind her lenses. "Countess Orlova? The one with the suspiciously flawless English accent and the fondness for high-stakes whist?" "The very same. I thought perhaps we might invite her to dinner on Thursday. I believe you could assess her character." Nell smiled, a genuine radiant expression that made several nearby bachelors sigh with regret that they had overlooked her for so many years. "I think that sounds delightful, husband. I do enjoy a good game of whist." The music swelled. They were the centre of the world, the most watched couple in England. Yet, in that crowded room, they were still alone together in the only way that mattered. Eleanor Vane might have once been a ghost, haunting the edges of other people's lives. But as she looked up into the devoted, burning gaze of the man who had found her in the shadows, she knew the truth. She had never really been invisible. She had just been waiting for the right person to open his eyes. What a journey for Nell and Sebastian. From being ignored by the world to becoming the ultimate power couple who saved England. It just goes to show that true power often hides where people least expect it. If you loved this story of an underdog finding her voice and taming the icy Duke, please give this video a big thumbs up. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another dramatic, romantic tale. Share this with a friend who needs a reminder that they are more than what others see. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.